This is the Food as Medicine series, and we are glad to have you all here today. Let's see, so the first 90 minutes here is going to, I should say, back up by saying 4-part series. This is the Why We Eat section. This is the part that I really got interested in. If you know me well, I really like my evidence-based medicine or evidence-based nutrition. So I really got an interest in diving into the literature in terms of nutrition here. My content is going to be about 90 minutes. Don't worry, there are a few breaks put in there in case you need to stand up and stretch or move around. And then the last 30 minutes will be our cooking demo, just like last time. So we already talked about a little bit about the objectives or overview. I am going to spend a little bit of time reviewing some of the content from the old lecture, but move on from that pretty quickly. You'll just see some overlap because what we eat and why we eat are obviously overlapping. The first half, I'm really going to be going into what is a protein, the basic science behind these things. Because you can't really get into the literature until you understand what we're talking about. And then towards the end, it's going to be, what are the randomized controlled trials? What are they actually showing? And go on from there. Also sprinkled in there is going to be some comments on fad diets, how to understand the evidence-based, food patterns, and a bunch of other gems all throughout all of that. So the question I posed at the first slide was, why do we eat? Well, first and foremost, we eat for pleasure. And this is a really important caveat because a lot of this talk, when I first started hearing nutrition stuff, I sat there and say, oh boy, I eat like crap. I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed. My God. I had a stack of Oreo cookies last night. It's like, man, I'm giving a nutrition lecture tomorrow, and here I am having Oreo cookies. But you do have to keep in mind, food is also pleasure too. So if we all ate kale all day long and only ate our perfect pureed food groups, yeah, sure, we might be a little healthier, but it wouldn't be a lot of fun, would it? So take everything that we're talking about with a grain of salt. It is okay to have some food for pleasure. Well, maybe not a grain of salt, grain of something healthier, but eating is for pleasure too. It is a communal activity, and there's a lot more behind food than just the nutrition and maximize nutritional benefit. But that being said, let's get into the rest of it. We eat to live, right? If we did not eat, we would not be alive. So at the basic science, and what I'm really going to be covering is what do we need to eat, why do we need to eat it, what is it doing in our bodies, and how can we optimize that for the most part with a little pleasure thrown in there. So what is an essential nutrient? I guess I could pose it to the room, but I literally wrote it on the slide. So essential nutrients are by definition required for normal bodily functions. So as opposed to just regular nutrients, you need those to live, but essential nutrients are ones that our bodies can't make. So for example, I could eat something, and then my body, it wasn't quite what I needed that moment, so my body will turn it into something else, so that way I can continue to grow and live and thrive. But essential nutrients cannot be made by our body. We have to get them in food. And that's, you'll see me mention essential nutrients a couple times, and as opposed to just essential meaning important, this is a medical term, like essential, we have to get them in some sort of food. There are about 40 essential nutrients. I say about because there's debate about 2 or 3 of them. Is it really essential, partially essential, et cetera? But around 40 essential nutrients that the body needs. And loosely categorized into 6 main categories. You can see them there on the left. And most people have heard these terms before. Carbohydrates, protein, fats, vitamins, minerals, and of course water. Without water, we would also not be alive. But although you've heard these terms before, you may not know exactly, yes, I think I know what a carb is. What is it? And we'll get to that in a couple slides here. First, I want to review some basic anatomy. This is Anatomy 101 back in med school. So when we start eating, again, having to eat to live, the first digestive step actually starts in your mouth. You wouldn't think it, but even just the act of chewing, the saliva coming out, the amylase enzymes, that is actually starting the process of degrading and processing food. So don't eat your food whole and swallow it quickly. Take your time, chew it. We'll cover other important reasons that we do that later, but there is some pre-digestion that starts even that early. After that, it goes down the esophagus. I was quizzing my 6-year-old on this the other day. Going down the esophagus. Not much happens to the esophagus. It goes through that in a matter of seconds, a minute tops. All the way through the esophagus, splashes into the stomach. Now the stomach, it depends on what you ate and how dense it was. Sometimes it passes pretty quickly through the stomach in 20 or 30 minutes. Other times it takes a good 3 or 4 hours, but really by 4 hours, over 90% of stuff should be cleared from the stomach. There really shouldn't be anything left in there. And if there is something left in there, then you have stomach emptying problems, also called gastroparesis. But you go through the stomach, and then you don't have to memorize all these names, but you go through the small intestines, that's the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Then you go through the colon. There's the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon. And then finally in the rectum. You don't have to, again, memorize really any of those. It's in your packet if you really want to. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but there is some fine nuances as to which protein and which mineral gets absorbed at which part of the duodenum or the jejunum. There is a slide of that in there if you do have malabsorption problems. Some people have had a portion of their colon or small bowel resected and then cannot absorb certain nutrients. For example, stomach surgeries. Again, we're not getting into those nuances, but just know there's some really cool information with that. Although I'm showing you this lovely picture, and this is closer to what it looks like, when I've been in operations and surgery, you can actually see it is kind of pinkish looking and it's moving around and swirling. Really, if we could see with correct eyes, sort of microscopic eyes, this picture is actually closer to representing what we are actually made of. See that picture? What is that, bugs on there? That is supposed to represent your microbiome. So fun fact about the microbiome, and if you don't know what the microbiome is, that is the bacteria, non-parasitic fungi, and even some viruses that just live on us all the time. Over 90% of that is in our gut. And fun fact about that, our body, if you count the average number of cells in your body in an average human, it's about 40 trillion. It's a lot of cells. But if you go through and count the number of bacteria and microbiome organisms inside of your body, sorry, I said 4 trillion, not 40 trillion, 4 trillion, it's 4.7 trillion. Just sit with that fact for a moment. We are more bacteria than we are people, if you actually count cell per cell. That really kind of gives you an identity crisis for a second. Like, whoa, wait, what am I? Am I a walking hodgepodge of bacteria? And this is relatively new science. Like, we've kind of known about it, but in this last decade, we've really started to understand more and more about the microbiome. There is still a lot we don't understand, but there is a lot of health about the microbiome, and we're going to be covering that in a little bit too. But I want you to think about microbiome. And that microbiome, it's not just in the stomach like this picture. It is your entire GI tract. Tons and tons, well, trillions of bacteria. All right, Allison, do we have the rope? Yes, we do. Okay. So here's our little demonstration. I might actually have you hand it out. So this chain has been precisely measured to be the length of one human person's intestinal tract. We're going to kind of pass this around and have everybody supporting it. Now this length, and it's about the same diameter too, it's not too far off, is inside of each and every one of you. So imagine you just had a meal, whatever you want it to be, and it's got to pass through the mouth, through the stomach, through the intestines. And look how long this thing is. That's that massively long chain, right? That went across the entire front row and around the corner is inside of your stomach right now. 26 feet. 26 foot long intestine. We just wanted to how complex this is, what our body is doing. Very interesting stuff. All right, let's keep on going here. So getting into our nutrients. So I'm not going to go through every one of them, but some of the basics that are, especially the ones that I dove into the literature. So I say protein. What do you think of? Meat, right. That's what I thought when I first started researching this talk. I said, yeah, protein, meat, right? That's what protein is. That's what most people think about. Well, yes, it's meat, but part of my talk today, I want you to shift your mindset. Protein isn't just meat. In fact, I want you to think of these other three things first and then think meat. When you think about it, like, oh yeah, I guess fish counts as protein, but you may be surprised, or if you listen to lecture, maybe less surprised, that lentils are actually a huge amount of protein. Nuts, legumes, a huge amount of protein. And in fact, I'll get you some evidence later that says that's probably the protein we should be focusing on, and meat should sort of be the extra, occasional thing. It shouldn't be your staple. Like when you think protein, you should not be thinking these things. Should not be thinking meat. So rewire your brain. Lentils, fish, and nuts are protein, and then a little bit of meat, animal-based meat if you like it as well. Now, again, medical school, biochemistry, organic chemistry, I'm going to get into what is actually protein. What actually is protein is building blocks. I want you to think Legos, like those. I don't know if you guys played a lot with Legos, or most of your kids or grandkids did, but you get those little brightly colored Legos. Well, that is really what we are made of. Protein is Legos. We're just made of these little building blocks. And this is fundamental to our building. It's not just our muscles, showing off our muscles like an animal-based muscle. This is actually our storage. Our hormones are actually built off of protein. Our antibodies, when we built an immune response, that's actually protein. Every single one of our enzymes, that catalyzes basic reactions in every single cell in your body, made of proteins. And you can keep on going. Receptors, globular proteins, fibrous proteins. And then here at the bottom, yes, there is some muscle as well, but it's also all of the connective tissue, all the myosin, all the keratin, the hair, the nails, all of it's protein. So don't just think that big slab of meat. Think building blocks, Legos inside your body, and plant-based proteins and fish as well. That really should be what it is. Now, just to demonstrate what that is, if you don't like organic chemistry or biochemistry, feel free to glaze out a little bit here. I won't go into too much detail, though. The actual Legos, the name for these Legos, the building blocks of proteins, are amino acids. There are around 40 amino acids in the human body that we need. Only about 9 of them are essential. And most people don't have too much trouble meeting them. We got a lot of meat in our diets and such. So this is not a huge one of deficiency, but it is important. I can't say the last time I saw a protein deficiency, so you're not going to see it very often. That's like a once every few years I see that kind of case. This picture up here is little building blocks of those amino acids. This is stuff that your DNA codes, and then your body builds a protein based off of the DNA. And then and that's, again, if you like organic chemistry, there's an actual picture of the carboxyl group and such with an amino acid. But this is the cool thing. This is what Legos actually look like in your body. They take these chains and they put them on all these really cool formations. They twirl them into these alpha helices and beta plated sheets, and they come into these crazy formations, and they move and they change, and they do all these wonderful things in your body. Extra credit if anybody knows which one that is. Oh, somebody raised a hand. You know? It's hemoglobin. Wow. Okay, you get your MD right there. That is hemoglobin. That's what holds on. When you breathe in oxygen, that oxygen has to latch onto the heme, and that's in all of your red blood cells and keeps you alive every day. You got a lot of heme in your body, and that is literally all protein. All of that color there is protein. So building blocks of your cells, protein, amino acids. All right. When I say fat, what do you think? Right? And I probably won't be able to undo this entire stereotype in this 5-minute talk right here on fats, but do the best you can. Obviously, we think fat, right? That's how we use it in our lexicon. But as opposed to thinking, oh, fat, I'm fat, that is fat, fats are actually really good things too. These foods represent the fats that I actually want you to be eating and using your food as medicine. So for those of hopefully you can all see it, but we've got our nuts, our walnuts, our hazelnuts, we've got avocados, we've got our oils. That's a picture of olive oil, but other oils count as fats too. And then there's the omega-3 fats and other fats in a lot of our fishes. These are good fats. Fat isn't just I'm fat. Like this is good food that we need to be eating. What is fat actually doing at a biochemistry level? Well, again, energy storage. Most of us can kind of, oh yeah, that's okay, we ate too much and we stored our extra energy, okay. But it's more than just the extra blubber or the extra energy we have. It also helps us store certain vitamins and nutrients. Like if you had no fat, that's not actually very healthy for you. I tell a lot of my patients over 65 that, you know what, I kind of want you to be 5 or 10 pounds overweight. You need a little extra cushion. That way you bounce instead of break. Vitamins D, A, E, and K are our fat-soluble vitamins. We do need some fat to be able to store those vitamins. We don't necessarily get them in perfect amounts every day, so we want to be able to store those up. And then it also does some heat generation. Hormones, most people don't know that. I kind of think of fats as like our special Legos. I don't know if you've ever played with a lot of Lego sets, but there's like that really cool special piece that has the special twist or the color or the sparkle. Some of our fats are that. Those are the chemical basis of a lot of our hormones. Like if you don't have fat, you can't make hormones, you're dead. So you do need fats. But then even more importantly, cell membranes and nerve insulation. This is, again, if you went through biochemistry like I did, we're talking the nerves that go through your body. That electrical signal that it conducts has to go down the axon. That's that long pathway that can go all the way from your spinal cord to your toe. And the myelin sheath is this fatty tissue that goes around that axon. And without that fatty sheath, anybody who's known somebody with multiple sclerosis knows that pathway takes much longer to go down. It can take, many seconds or in a minute. If you're trying to tell your foot to move and it takes a minute to move, that's not very helpful in life. That myelin sheath, though, you can skip through the nodes of Ranvier and things happen right away. So fats are needed for very basic things like your nerves working, or even more basic, your cell membranes. Here's a picture, and again, gloss over the biochemistry pictures if it's not your thing. But this is probably the most important part of this. Every single cell in our body, it's inside is the Legos and the workhorses and the engines, all the proteins. But the actual structure of the cell membrane, the thing that goes around your cell, that is all fat. The term for it is phospholipid bilayer, and you can see some pictures up here. Without fats, our cells literally would not be there. Like, we need fats in our body. So don't just think of it as the fat rolls here. Like, these are things that your body does actually need. Now, that being said, most people do not have a fat deficiency in the American diet. So you don't need to go out and go eat a bunch more fat. But do try to transfer to some of those fat pictures that I showed you, the healthier fats. The pictures of healthier fats, so again, you don't need to get bogged down in the biochemistry, but if you do like it, you can look at the details. Biochemistry, it's not a lot different. This is the horrible trans fats, the ones that humans made. They've got a great shelf life, they're cheap, they're easy to produce. And then a decade later, we found everybody was having heart attacks or strokes. So that's now been banned. It is still sneaking its way into some foods, and we'll cover in the third lecture about how to find that on a nutrition label and dodge it, because it is still sneaking around. But avoid trans fat, horrible for your body. You can see that's only one biochemical bond different from this supremely healthy omega-3 fatty acid. It helps your brain, helps your nerves. It's fantastic. It's like a location of one bond and huge difference in our body. This, by the way, I put a star here because this is an essential fat. The other fats, our body can, like, it's that important. Our body has figured out how to make triglycerides and saturated fats for storage and stuff, but our body cannot make omega-3 fatty acids. So that's why you have everybody saying, eat some fish. Yeah, fish are so healthy. You need those omega-3 fatty acids there. And it is, I'm sorry to say, for those of you who like supplements, it is better in fish than it is in a supplement. So
You don't like fish at all, any form.
Yeah, and that gets back to the food is pleasure too, right? So I can say it's healthy for you, but then it's your decision whether that's something you want to try to choke down or mask or put a bunch of other food on or just skip it entirely. Yep, that's entirely, everybody's got their own preferences and all that kind of stuff.
Other food sources are wheat germ and walnuts.
Walnuts, I think you said you didn't like walnuts last time either, I remember. And then wheat germ too. But again, you can find that if you feel like you must, that you can get other ways to mask it, hide it in food, etc. And I mean, a pill is better than nothing, so that's certainly a possibility too. But food is the better way to get most of these nutrients. Yeah, I'll spare you the further biochemical talk here. All right, carbohydrates. When I say carbs, what do you think? Right? I'm kind of leading the discussion here, giving you a big picture, but carbs, bread, right? Like a big white bread, and there's all this stuff, look out for carbs, too many carbs, be carb counting. And it, again, wasn't until I wrote this lecture, I was like, hang on a second, like we're talking about this all wrong. The media is really talking about this all wrong. I think you will all be surprised to see what carbs actually are. This is actually what carbs are. So most of you would have guessed wheat bread, right? Okay, that's got carbs. But wait a second. Okay, maybe a potato. You heard they're starchy, right? That's got carbs. Wait, a banana? An apple? Blueberries have carbs? Strawberry? Like, what? I thought carbs were bad. What's going on? How do all these things have carbs? Lentils, yes, they have carbs. So even a glass of milk has got carbs. So wait a second. What are carbs, you might be asking? Well, these are even simpler than the other ones. The building blocks, and then the special Legos. Carbohydrates are pure energy. Sugar is the simple answer. Carbs are sugar. Now, I say glucose here because that's the one that's mostly being used in our body. Technically, there is fructose, galactose, sucrose, and a couple other ones, especially in the plant kingdom and other animal kingdoms. We're just going to simplify it to sugar and glucose today, just for simplicity's sake. And if you think about, okay, well, if carb is sugar, and sugar, obviously we need sugar, and that's the energy powerhouse of our cells, then okay, yeah, actually, blueberries have sugar. It's a healthy sugar, but it's sugar. Apples have sugar, but okay, so suddenly this makes a little more sense. We know sugars are in these foods. And if you start imagining carbs as sugar, this makes a little more sense. And this is why carbs aren't bad. Some carbs are better than others, and some carbs are worse than others, but carbs themselves are not actually bad. If you did not eat carbs, you would be dead. Like, you need sugar to survive. And to that point, again, more biochemistry. Here is, again, don't need to remember this, but this is the actual chemical basis of sugar. This is what glucose looks like in our body. Literally fundamental to every cell. Like, if you run out of sugar, your brain will be dead in 5 minutes. Your cells will be dead in just about as much time. Like, that is the powerhouse, the energy that is used in every single cell in your body. Now, you may have heard the terms starch, fiber, glycogen, some other things like that. You may be surprised to know that those are also all carbs. As opposed to a simple sugar, we call them complex because we're just sticking sugars onto each other. So I thought this picture was particularly helpful. You see that one little sugar molecule there that's like a little hexagon? You can see in this tiny picture here, it's a bunch of hexagons all put in together in a line. with a couple branches there. We then call that a starch. So starches are actually just a lot of sugar all stuck together, which is why when you have a really starchy thing, even in your mouth still, your salivary amylase starts to digest it, breaks it into sugars, and bam, your starch is now a sugar. Which is why sometimes there's that bias of like, oh, that's a lot of starch. You got to be careful because you're still getting your sugars that way. Now, our body then processes starch a little bit more. When we store it in our liver, we call it glycogen. You can see it's pretty much the same thing, though. It's just got more branches, more complicated tree. But then we've got fiber. Now, if you remember from the first lecture, we talked a while about how healthy fiber was. And I'm going to tell you in a lot more slides about how healthy fiber is. But now I'm telling you it's a sugar. And we all know, again, there is no sugar deficiency in the American diet. We're all getting enough sugar. But we are not getting enough fiber. And technically, fiber is sugar. But this is where, yes, we are not getting enough sugar. We're not getting the right type of sugar. So you can see, here's our little hexagons, our sugar molecules. But instead of being in a row, like a train and a branching tree there, it's in a grid. And this is really important. I'll cover this in the next slide, too. When you have all those extra biochemical bonds, our body can't actually cleave these and turn them into sugar and then digest them right away. Literally, we don't have the enzyme. So when we eat fiber, it does not automatically turn into sugar. It has to go through a different process, hint, microbiome, and it doesn't get processed the same way, which is where all the health benefits of fiber come. So this is a really cool fact to really understand about the difference between a sugar, a starch, and fiber. They're all technically sugar, but fiber is healthier. And sugar, again, needed, but not in the quantities Americans are consuming them in. Hopefully that was like a, whoa, I didn't know that moment. All right, I'm seeing some nodding, so we'll keep on going. All right, getting into some of the meat here. So I kind of hinted at this, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates themselves are not bad. We heard us talking about last time, refined carbohydrates, especially highly refined carbohydrates, those aren't so good. So what did we do to the sugar to distort it in such a way? Well, if you were alive 200 years ago, you would go into the field, hack off a bunch of wheat. You've got the grain on top, and here's that picture of the grain. It's got the bran on the outside, kind of the tough little shell, but still edible, a lot of fiber in that. Then you've got the endosperm, that's the good tasting stuff. That's pure sugar and starch, immediately to sugar in your body. And then you've got the germ, which has a lot of those nutrients, antioxidants, vitamins, all that stuff. Well, this is good for us, right? These are the whole grains. You've kept the entire grain. But then we discovered in the last 100 years that, well, if you take off the bran and you suck out the germ and you turn it to just the endosperm, then you add some more sugar and stir it up and process it and call it, now I'm going to be bad to, I was going to say donut, Fruit Loops, Lucky Charms. I don't want to trash on any brands here, but there is your highly refined carbohydrate. And that's where the modern food industry is really smart, right? They are not out here to make sure that you have a healthy lifestyle and you are moderating your sugars and living to your best potential. They're out there to make your money. And it was pretty quick that they learned that more sugar tastes good. Humans buy it more, they get more money, and they literally have labs of people designing foods to have the maximum fat to sugar ratio to grab your taste buds and make you want to buy more. And so if you start thinking about going to the grocery store as resisting the food industry, that was a helpful mind shift for me to really go through and say, hang on a second, what are you trying to sell me right now? Like I want to go back to how the food is, how it should be, not how we have processed it to become more addictive. Not to say, again, I still had my Oreo cookies last night. I subscribed to that marketing trend, but I can't be doing that all day long, right? I can't be having my fruity pebbles or whatever for breakfast and then a big slab of white bread for lunch and then have it for dinner and such. You got to have it like I am going to indulge now, and that is my time. All right, so any questions on carbs versus refined carbs? That's a really important part. Yeah?
If you're eating the refined carbs, is it just that you're not getting any goodness from them?
Correct. So she asked, if you're eating the refined carbs, is it just that you're not getting any goodness from them? Yes, and then more. So we have literally taken off the fiber, that healthier version of sugar that I showed you. So we've removed the fiber and we've removed the nutrients, and then we added more of the purified sugar, which we already have too much of. So they kind of took away the good stuff and added more bad stuff. And again, if we were sugar deficient in our diet, maybe that wouldn't be so bad, but we are not sugar deficient in our diet. So that is not the problem here. Now, when they first did this, there were so many illnesses across the United States, people getting sick left, right, and center, that the federal government mandated that they put a few of those vitamins and nutrients back. And that was that nice slide from the first PowerPoint, the first lecture series. But they only put back, what is it, 4 or 5 of them total? They didn't do all the others. There's like 20 that are supposed to be in there. So it's only partially replenished to stop the most serious diseases, which is really sad when you think about it. I mean, I'm glad they repleted something. It's better than nothing. But probably we should have just put a cap on the refined carbohydrate industry instead of getting people back to the original whole grain here. All right, let's see if we've got our pistachio model. All right, so I'm going to give our 2 volunteers. One is a pile of shelled pistachios, and then the other one, a pile of unshelled pistachios.
I'm assuming there's a difference.
One is shelled, one is unshelled. Don't worry, I won't make you eat anything if you don't want to.
Oh, no, I don't
Okay.
mind eating something. I'm just curious. There's got to be
All
a
right,
difference.
so this is not going to be a shocking answer, but I wonder who can get how many pistachios into the cup without the shell in it. And we're going to count to 10 and see who can go fastest. So you've got to shell them and get the empty pistachio in there. You can just put them one by one. But go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right. So how many pistachios did you get in your unshelled cup?
I think 15 maybe?
Good. 15 or 16 pistachios, because she didn't have to shell a thing. Look how fast those went in one by one. How many did you get?
3.
Only 3. All right. Thank you very much. You can, if you want to eat them, go ahead and take them to your seat.
Or salted.
They are salted. Yes, I have trouble getting rid of my salt on my nuts. Sorry. So obviously, we're not shocked that it took longer to shell pistachios and put them in a cup. That demonstration was supposed to show you that that's what is happening with the refined grains and the whole grains. When you have a whole grain, your body has to do that whole process, taking the shell off, stripping the fiber, processing it, and then putting it away. Well, when you take off that fiber, that shell, all those nutrients, your body's just like, woo, here we go, sugar, sugar, sugar. Process it quickly. 15 pistachios as opposed to 3, right? That's a big difference. So that's what's happening inside our body is we want our body to be shelling that grain. We want it to be shelling the pistachio. All right. And then here's sort of and this is not a perfect diagram, but this is just sort of a real life interpretation of what things look like in terms of fiber and added sugars. So on the side here, these are the healthy carbs. Again, carbs are not evil. They're not just this big slice of white bread. We've got our sweet potatoes, our beans, our fruits and vegetables. These are really good fiber sources that are very healthy for you. Also very good is the whole grains, the steel-cut oats. Again, making sure that it says 100% whole grain somewhere on there. We'll cover that in the 3rd lecture, how to verify that. I finally, after years of trying, managed to make the switch from regular spaghetti to whole grain spaghetti. I am Italian. That was a really hard switch for me to do. I resisted it for many years. But after doing the research for this lecture, I said, I have to do it. Fine, okay, I'll do it. And I have to say, I finally tricked my brain into I'm starting to prefer it. It has a different texture. I'm looking forward to like the more grittiness to it. But it took a while to trick my brain to that. My husband is not on board yet. He is still buying the white pastas. And I keep on cooking it because I'm trying to use it up, and then he buys another box. But that's another problem. Getting further, and not to say again, it's not that you can never have these, just in moderation, right? I had my Oreos, but over here we start having the white products. So brown rice, good. White rice, we've refined that a little bit, right? We stripped off some of that stuff. Our white breads, white flour. I have not yet bought. You guys are doing the wheat flour, right? I haven't tried wheat flour yet. That's next on my list here. Over here, the really again, you're allowed to have it, but in moderation. The sugars, the sodas, the cookies, all that kind of stuff. Now, some things that I put on here that were a little controversial when we were deciding the slides. Popcorn. I have over here on that's a good carb. Popcorn actually, because it kind of self-exploded, that kernel is still in there, and you're still eating that whole grain. But be careful what you put on the popcorn, right? If it's plain straight popcorn, maybe a little bit of light cinnamon, that's great. But if you do movie theater popcorn with a ton of saturated fat and butter and sugar and salt, that ain't good popcorn. So depends on what popcorn you put on. And then I picked Raisin Bran to kind of prove a point. Like, yes, Lucky Charms is worse. It has way more sugars. But Raisin Bran tricks a lot of my patients because, Raisin Bran, it's got 5 grams of fiber. Like, that's a healthy, I'm adding my bran, there we go. But if you look at that label, and we'll cover that in the 3rd lecture, there's like 7-10 grams of added sugar.
Yeah, there's kasha cereal, and there's a demo that I've done in the past where I've shown like Raisin Bran and kashi, Goleen, different ones, and when you look at the total added sugar, they're very comparable, and that's a good place to go to back when you were asking, what about enriched white flour? Is it actually bad for us? Well, it depends if it's got added sugar. So we'll do labels later, but the outside of the packaging is very misleading, so look out for added
I know, you look at that, right? And wait, it's got a happy sunshine, it's got raisins, those are grapes, right? Like, that's gotta be healthy. And with the added sugar, it really negates a lot of those health benefits.
What is the thing under the flour?
The thing under this is a bowl of white rice. Yep, white rice. Yep, you got it. So brown rice would be the alternative. I ran out of room on the slide.
Oh, I like brown rice better.
Yeah, I same thing. I finally switched to brown rice, and I actually like it better now. Myself a year ago would not have said that. So our taste buds can change. All right, so you guys have been sitting very patiently for a while. We're going to review activity recommendations while standing up and stretching. The USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, has activity recommendations as well as food recommendations. While this is certainly not a lecture on movement, I will probably write one in the next few years because the evidence there is even more compelling than the food literature. But this is one of the three that I'm going to cover today, is that adults should move more and sit less. Ironically, I'm making you all sit for 90 minutes, but trying to get you to move right now. And really, some activity is better than none. So try to move in any way you can. Even if it's just going for one walk a day, short walk, there is still some health benefits in that. So even if it's just a stand up and stretch, and I try to do this in my office, stand up, stretch around, do a little squat. Even if you can't stand, just moving your body. We know that the longer you're sitting still, the more your muscles cramp up, the more I have people with neck pain and back pain, myself included. So just move, even from your seat, move in some way, back and forth, left and right. All right, another 10 seconds of movement, then we can all sit down and keep on going. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So her question is, how about some of this new stuff hitting the shelves? You see cauliflower pasta, veggie pizza dough, etc. Like, is that any good? That caught my, I'm going to have to pass that to my nutritionist for sure. I would say you have to look at the nutrition label, because some of it might actually be good if it's actually vegetable protein based and etc. But if they process it too much or added sugars, then it ain't good anymore.
Yeah, the ones that are called veggie sticks, if you look at the ingredients, it's potato. So it's basically potato sticks. They're not vegetables. So you have to look at the ingredients to know.
Cauliflower pasta.
And if it's cauliflower pasta, if the first ingredient is cauliflower, just like riced cauliflower, then yes, it's good for you. But it's been heavily processed, so it's not quite as bioavailable. Again, the demonstration, you don't have to work to get access to it. So fresh is ideal, but there's still nutrition in the refined cauliflower pasta.
So do you think it's the whole wheat pasta is better than the cauliflower?
Whole wheat versus cauliflower pasta.
I think variety and moderation is the key. Don't think of carbs as bad. So whole wheat pasta is actually good for us, but there's a lot of misinformation that we should be avoiding carbs, not moderation with carbs. And like Dr. Faraci said, glucose is the preferred fuel of choice. We need a little bit of carbohydrate every 5 hours for normal brain function and to get the vitamin and mineral profile, which is very different compared to cauliflower, compared to whole wheat.
Again, look at your ingredient list, and as long as you're getting a real ingredient, not the highly refined carbs with all the added sugars, you're going to be getting some benefit there. And I used to think of like, okay, I need to have a meal, I need my carb. Well, an apple counts as a carb. Like you can fill up with a meal full of veggies. You do not have to have a grain as a part of a meal for every meal. That does not, a lot of other countries do just fruit for breakfast. They don't have to have the pancakes and the waffles and all the grains. So grains are not like an essential base that we have to have with every meal. And try to break yourself of that and find other ways to incorporate it. So again, forest through the trees. Don't get too hung up on the details. So then it gets overwhelming. You're like, oh my gosh, but I did this version of the prune and this kind of pasta. If you're going for whole grain and avoiding some of those highly refined grains, you've already made a really important improvement. So don't get too hung up on the details and also I'm not very strong on the details. That's what they're for. All right. So I promised a little detour through the microbiome. So we all have already seen this picture here of the esophagus, the stomach, and et cetera. But I want to kind of talk about what happens. So the food is splashed into your stomach and it's starting to go into your intestines. Now, if you ate sugar, it's already being absorbed right now. But if you eat fiber, that fiber comes through and your body, like I mentioned before, cannot digest it. It cannot cleave these grid-like bonds here, so it's struggling. But you know what can digest fiber? Your microbiome. And there's, like I said, trillions of bacteria in your gut, but you can kind of narrow it down to like a top 10 and maybe even a top 1 or 2 that are really doing the heavy lifting. And actually, I can't even say that with confidence. They're discovering new ones every day, so don't quote me on that one. Let me finish this thought and then I'll get to your question right there. So here is the gut microbiome, just a quick sample picture. And they are doing all sorts of fancy stuff, but one of their favorite foods is fiber. Yes, there are other things that they eat and digest and such, but the buddies that, and I'm calling this the buddies in your belly. I quite literally stole this quote from this child book that somebody gave to my kids, and it helped inspire this talk, to be perfectly honest. It's a little story about probiotics, and it goes through, and I kid you not, my 3-year-old picked up his asparagus yesterday and said, "Is this feeding the buddies in my belly? Is this making them happy?" I said, "Why, yes, the asparagus is making your buddies happy." He goes, "Okay," and he shouted down, no questions asked. I introduced this book to him last year, and it's clearly been percolating there. So it goes through the little superhero microbiome, and it's very true. If we feed the buddies in our belly what they want, and it's got a lot of pictures of fruits and vegetables, but we all know that's actually fiber. Fruits and vegetables are really good in fiber. Then the correct buddies start growing, and they make all sorts of, we're getting into biochemistry again, short-chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, butyrate is a really big one. Our body cannot make that on its own. We need our microbiome to make it. That goes through, again, here's our brush border of the intestines. I'm not even going to try to name these proteins and channels here, but I am going to point out this one right here. This is glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1. Does anybody know a GLP-1 medication? Ozempic, you got it. So the pharmaceutical industry, now I prescribe Ozempic, so I don't want to harp on them too much, but the pharmaceutical industry has discovered that GLP-1 and many other hormones from this cascade do the things that we want them to do. They make you slow down your gut. You feel full. You're not that hungry anymore. You're satisfied with the fiber that you ate. You don't need to go get extra sugar. And so we have drugs that can turn this on into great amounts. And again, I prescribe this very often, and it is a very wonderful drug for very many of my patients. But if we could get a food industry that fed us natural fiber, fed our microbiome to make our own natural GLP-1, we probably wouldn't need as much Ozempic. So one kind of, again, shift that you can think of is fiber is nature's Ozempic. Even if you are on Ozempic right now, or it's there's Zepbound and Wegovy and all these other ones, have some more fiber. It's like enhancing your dose a little bit, right? A little extra weight loss there. So that is a really important part of feeding the buddies in your belly. And that can of beans is supposed to be, and we'll cover this in another thing, sort of fiber-containing foods. If you get fruits and vegetables, 2, 3, 4, 5 grams of food, whole grains, you're getting up to maybe 5, 6. If you got a really good whole grain, beans are like 15 grams. Like this is, if you're trying to get fiber in a day, go for some beans. I have tried to really cook a lot more beans recently. Now, hang on, you had a question first. Go ahead.
I've been hearing all the news about the microbiome the last few years. I'm wondering, is it limited to just the stomach, or is other parts of the digestive system included?
Correct. So he's asking, microbiome has been a lot more in the media, and where is it? Is it really just the stomach or other parts? So over 90 to 95% is in the GI tract. So we do have some in our vaginal area and our skin and such. The majority is in the GI tract, and actually there's not that much in the stomach, because the stomach has stomach acid, and it's a pretty miserable place to live unless you're a very specialized microbe. Most of the vast majority of these are going to be in the intestines. That's where a lot of the action is happening here. Small intestines in particular. The large intestines, it has a simpler job of mostly reabsorbing water. So for anybody who's had their colon removed, they have an ostomy kind of put in, and it just comes out pure liquid because it hasn't had a chance to reabsorb the water from the colon. So really that's the small intestines. That's most of that 26 feet that you're having is that small intestines. Yep, and that's where that microbiome is. There's another question back there.
While you're talking about fiber, can you just briefly touch on soluble versus insoluble?
Yes, thank you. I'll briefly touch on that later as well. Either is good. The studies that I will tell you about in a little bit point to soluble is maybe a little better for some of the research purposes. And then you guys can speak a little bit more to that about foods and such. But I'd say either is good, but if you had a choice and it was an easy choice to make, go for soluble. Not a good enough answer? Yeah, you know more than I do on that.
Both is good. I think of soluble is the kind that helps to sop up the bile and other things, and then the insoluble is the kind that's like the broom, it brushes it out. So we really need both to help our gut biome, and then the fiber that we can't digest is what the gut biome live off of. So that helps.
Could you give a couple of examples?
Yeah, go for it.
Soluble fibers that's higher in oats and apples, And insoluble fiber is going to be higher in the greens and some of the whole grains like the wheat and things like that.
That is a perfect dovetail into my next demo. Picture of a sponge here. So I need another volunteer. Anybody? Yeah, come on up. Thank you for being brave here. All right. Oh, thank you. Perfect. I was going to have her run to the sink. That's much better. Okay. We're going to make a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. We'll do a concentrated mess, I don't know, right here-ish. Yeah, there we go. That's actually a slightly better idea. Let me move this over. All right. This is a mini PVC pipe. That is supposed to represent your digestive system. This sponge is going to represent a delicious fiber meal you just had, a bunch of beans and some broccoli or cauliflower. See if you can fit that into the pipe. It's a hard no. Maybe with a lot of squeezing and squishing, you might break it a little bit. It's not going to be very fun. If you do not have water with your fiber, that's going to happen. Now, I'd like you to put that, you can take it out of the pipe for a second. Go ahead and stick it in the water. Oh, no. There we go. Move it around a little bit. Great. So that fiber is absorbed, I mean, as you guys all know what sponges do, has absorbed the water very well. Now go ahead and try to put it through the pipe. Here we go. Look at that. The sponge made it through the pipe. My gosh, it's the same sponge. All we added was water. Exactly. Thank you very much. You can stick it right back in there. All right. Now, this is a really important, obviously, yes, a sponge can fit through better if there's water in it, but this is a really good model to explain what's actually happening in our microbiome, sorry, in our gut. That fiber, it does need water because it will just become a consolidated chunk and you will get constipated. So, yes, you need fiber. And yes, I have been increasing my fiber, but you got to have water with it. Now, I don't mean you have to have like 3 gallons a day. Like just, don't get dehydrated. Have your glass with your meal kind of thing. So if I have a big bean meal, I make sure I have a glass of water with it. And boy, does that fill you up fast. I can't eat as much as I used to when I'm doing it that way. Now, for just a word of warning to any of you who are thinking, well, I guess one change I'm going to make today is I'm going to increase my fiber. Don't do it all in once. These buddies in your belly, they haven't been fed a good fiber diet in maybe ever, certainly not recently. I'll talk about it in the next slide, but we were supposed to be getting like 30 grams of fiber or more a day. And the average American is much lower than that, like 10 grams. So if you gave them 30 grams tomorrow, they're going to be like, woohoo, it's party time. They're going to start making all these new gases and byproducts. And you are going to have bloating and constipation and gas of both ends. It's not a pretty sight. So slowly increase, maybe add half a meal of beans. The next week, step it up again. Don't go all out and try to get to 30. You can even quantify the fiber if you want to. I did not take my own advice and regretted it a couple times. So go slowly up on the fiber should you choose to do that. All right, next slide here. So just like we had the conversation about the buddies in our belly, this is the unhappy, sorry, I needed to flip the colors and I didn't know how to do that. The happy buddies are in red here. The happy buddies are smiling. They have been fed fiber. They're doing good. Over here are the angry buddies. They have had a lot of extra sugar, a lot of extra saturated fat. They're just not getting the fiber that they really want in life. We're going to use that to demonstrate this mouse model here. So we know this about the microbiome. There are happy buddies and there are unhappy buddies, and what we feed them changes them. Kind of hard to study that in people. You can't really force people to eat only certain foods for long periods of time and then study the microbiome. We have suggestions where we've sampled people, but it's hard to really randomize it and control it. But we can do that with mice. So what they did with, this is actually many, many mice studies over many, many years. I'm just kind of summarizing them in one kind of package anecdote here. But one study I looked at took identical twin humans. And these identical twins, although they were genetically identical, one was very obese and one was very thin. And they took those people's microbiomes and they got a litter of mice and they infused the human microbiomes into the mice. And lo and behold, despite this being the same litter of mice randomized into different panels, the one fed the human, the skinny twin, ended up being a regular skinny little mouse running around doing his thing. And then the mouse fed the obese twins microbiome, very quickly became an obese mouse. The only difference between these mice was the microbiome they were exposed to. And we can cause fat mice, skinny mice. Now this is simplifying it a little bit because there's a lot more nuances and stuff, but this is reproducible in many, many mice experiments here. Now, even more interesting If you take these two mice, you've got your fat mouse and your skinny mouse, and now you start housing them together. They are forced to share a cage again. Within a few weeks, a month, the fat mouse actually turns back into a skinny mouse. Why is that, you say? Well, mice have this disgusting habit of eating each other's poop. they run around and they just eat anything on around. So they're eating each other's microbiome. Humans don't do that, mice do. So they were getting themselves a little fecal transplant and turning into skinny mice. Again, the only difference is that you just housed them together and they had a different microbiome exposure and they started changing. They got more of the happy buddies and less of the upset buddies that they were being fed from the humans.
So why didn't the skinny mice get that by eating their buddies' poop?
Yeah, and it has to do with the diet. So that was actually the next part I'm about to say. So they were being fed a normal diet, like a normal mouse chow diet. Now, if you do that same experiment, but you feed them a bad diet, right? They're feeding the buddies all the wrong stuff. And this is like, I don't know, McDonald's for mice, I guess. You feed them this, and suddenly, even when you house them together, that fat mouse does not become a skinny mouse. That fat mouse, if you're feeding that unhappy microbiome the wrong foods, even when they eat the skinny mouse's poop and try to give them a transplant, you're feeding that biome the wrong thing and it stays unhappy. It's not being fed the right stuff to then grow a new microbiome there. And again, this is a little simplified. They've done lots of different versions of the study and such, but microbiome is very powerful. And they've tried to bring this to humans. It's, again, not quite as simple as it sounds. There are case reports of somebody getting a transplant, a fecal transplant, and suddenly having a dramatic change in weight that they had never had their whole life, but that is not very reproducible. There's a lot more going into the human microbiome and life and what we're eating and how we're living our lives, not nearly as controlled as a mouse experiment. Yes?
The twins, did they start out with the same microbiomes and then they caused that by what they ate, by their diet?
So that study did not go into like where the twins had come from and what their weight used to be 30 years ago. It was just like, you are identical twins and one is fat and one is skinny. And that was about as far as they went for that study. Correct. So again, in humans, things are far more complicated. So yes, there are genetics that can predispose you to obesity, but that doesn't mean you're destined to be obese. You know, certain diets, certain lifestyles, certain things you eat can change some of that genetic stuff. But there are people who, with even correctly doing stuff, their genetics do push them harder towards obesity, and they have to work harder to lose weight. So as part of what you're getting at, and we'll cover this a little bit in the fourth lecture too, is obesity isn't just a lifestyle choice. It has been fully classified now as a disease. There is a disease of obesity. And there is actually medicine and science behind why some people are more likely to become obese. And so although I'm saying fiber will make everybody, I am not saying, that's what I'm trying to say, I am not saying fiber will make everybody skinny. Fiber will fill you up faster, and we're going to cover that in the evidence review, but it will not make everybody skinny. It will just make more people healthier, and some people a little skinnier too, but healthier is really the word that I want to go for there. Yeah.
A lot of this genetic and all you're mentioning about this, I don't know if anybody watched the Oprah special that was on last week about being overweight and all. Went into all this about the obese being a disease and the genetics. I highly recommend it if you didn't see it. She talked about the GOP and how it affects the brain and that you don't feel ever you're satisfied eating. And
Absolutely.
Eating, and that's why she talked about the Ozempic.
Absolutely.
It was an hour special on CBS a week ago.
Okay. So an hour special on CBS Oprah a week ago, if anybody wants to dive a little bit more into, and I know Oprah, I don't follow a lot of I don't have time with all the research I'm doing, but I think she is on Ozempic and has been life-changing for her, and that was part of the story she's telling. And so, and exactly what you're mentioning, this is when I do prescribe the Ozempics, I talk about how it will turn off that food noise, that hunger signal, and you will finally feel full for the first time in your life, and it is a life-changing medication for a lot of people. Fiber is, I would argue, just as good. Obviously, for some people, their disease of obesity is so strong that they do need the medication. But for a lot of us, maybe we don't struggle as much with obesity. It's just a little bit of weight we want to lose. We're looking for a little extra health. Fiber also makes that GLP-1. It will also give you that, finally, I feel full. I feel satisfied. I don't have to keep on eating. And we know fiber does that. I'll cover that in the studies in a little bit, especially fiber with water. Then you really get full. All right, I'm going to keep on going. I want to make sure we're staying on time here. So when I've mentioned the word fecal transplant a few times, I want to make sure to define that. Yes, a fecal transplant is what it sounds like. You take poop from one person and you give it to another person. It's actually been done, if you look into your history textbooks, like far back as the 4th century. There was people in China who had a severe GI illness, they weren't getting better. They would cook up some yellow soup from a healthy person and give it to the sick individual, and bam, they're cured. They don't have a GI illness anymore because they're giving them an old version of a fecal transplant. Please don't do that at home. That is not sanitary. I do not want you all coming from this lecture trying to eat poop. There are a few FDA-indicated reasons to do a fecal transplant, but only one that's being approved by insurance right now and being done. That is for people who have had treatment-resistant C. diff. C. diff is this nasty GI infection that you can get often after antibiotics. You've disrupted your flora, horrible watery diarrhea. And in some folks, even after the antibiotics, they are so sick, they're even going to the hospital. You give them a fecal transplant, it's like 95% cured. It's incredible. And so that is an FDA reason they will pay for your fecal transplant. And there's a couple different centers do it different ways. Some put down an NG tube and squirt it down the tube. Some have it nicely capsuled and packaged in little capsules that you swallow. You're not actually tasting the poop, don't worry. It's been, I haven't actually been to a lab that does it, but somehow sterilized, but doesn't kill the good microbiome, but you're not getting bad ones. They're screening it and processing it in some way. That's why it gets expensive. The capsule, yeah, okay, maybe the capsule is sterile and the rest isn't, who knows? I haven't gone through one myself. But that is a fecal transplant. There is a very convincing literature for irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, that upwards of 50 to 60% of people can have dramatic improvement in their IBS from a fecal transplant. I have not yet seen an insurance company try to cover that yet. There's not a lot of centers doing it. And then there's probably a host of other things, but we're still learning about this and still studying this right now. But would you rather, well, actually, we'll get to that in a second. Probiotics is another question I get. Well, can I just take some probiotics? That's like a cleaner, easier version of a fecal transplant, right? Unfortunately, the studies are not showing that. I mean, yes, there is a couple good studies showing that if you have antibiotic-associated diarrhea, that a probiotic can help you get better a little faster. But most of the other probiotic literature is not very impressive. So eating probiotics isn't really the solution here. Like, yeah, maybe it helps a little bit, but really not that much. Really, the simple answer here to our talk of food as medicine, we have to feed the buddies in our belly. We can give ourselves better buddies by giving ourselves fecal transplants regularly or trying to take probiotics every day, but if you're still eating too many refined carbohydrates, too many saturated fats, the beautiful buddies that you just populated are going to die anyway and not going to help. But if you feed them your beans, your fiber, oh boy, this is being a little hairy. Your beans, your fiber, you are feeding the buddies in your belly, and then they will thrive, and then your buddies will be happier, and you will be happier. Yeah?
How about prebiotics? How do they fit into this?
Yeah, same thing. I would classify probiotics and prebiotics as the same here. You can populate that gut, but unless you are feeding them, not going to do very much. So they're...
It doesn't feed them, the prebiotics?
I mean, no, food. Food is the medicine here. The prebiotics are kind of the, I mean, yes, there is some prebiotics, and yes, there might be some benefit, but that's, again, the industry saying, ooh, here's a fact. Let's exploit it, capsule it, and sell it to everybody.
I thought that there were some prebiotics that came in the form of food, but I don't know.
I mean, yes. I mean, yes. So, like, for example, yogurt has some natural cultures in it. Yogurt is a good food. Go ahead and eat it. But just if you don't eat yogurt, you can still have a very healthy microbiome and very happy buddies in your belly. So eating certain prebiotics and probiotics are not the answer. It's we have to feed them with fiber and other healthy foods.
Yeah, prebiotics are in fruits and vegetables naturally, so.
Yeah, so I guess I assumed you meant capsulized, sort of industrialized prebiotics, but if you're just talking about food, you know, a prebiotic is something that feeds the buddies in your belly. So beans, fruits, vegetables, right? That is the food as medicine part of this, absolutely. Go ahead.
So you're saying somebody who has IBS, if they eat properly, that would go a long way to...
Yeah, and again, I couldn't say for sure because the studies are not 100%, but we know that fecal transplants can cure 50% of IBS patients, which you would then think the next corollary would be if we could help the microbiome, feed the right diet, create some happier buddies, a lot of IBS could improve. Now, again, IBS is not a fully understood disease. There's probably 10 different subtypes. I have one patient who is trying his darndest to eat more fiber and more beans, but his IBS gets worse when he eats beans. So I don't have a good solution for that guy. But again, it is more complicated. Humans are complicated. But in general speaking, more fiber, more healthy foods will help the buddies in your belly and will help you be healthier as well. Yeah?
I'm surprised you haven't mentioned fermented foods.
Yes. So I actually, you know, so fermented food, okay, they're going to in the food demo. Fermented foods are, well,
it's sauerkraut.
Oh, go ahead.
Sauerkraut. So as it ages, it actually ferments and then it makes the probiotics.
Yep. So there are some good buddies. Yeah, kombucha is another one. So there are some pretty good probiotics and actually more buddies you can introduce. But again, having like some kombucha or some sauerkraut is not going to make you magically better. You have to continue to feed them the correct foods to help. So it is part of a good diet. But also with a grain of, I have to get rid of my term grain of salt. I say that a lot apparently. There are some people who can't tolerate lots of beans, like that patient I aforementioned. There are some people who don't do well with gaseous products, and kombucha makes them double over in pain. So pay attention to your body too. But yes, fermented foods can be quite healthy for the probiotics and the microbiome as well. All right, we're coming up to another break in a minute, so hang on. So I promised to answer, because this is a question I get all the time, if not daily, certainly weekly. What about X-FAD diet, the Atkins diet, the keto diet, the Whole30 diet, endless amounts of them, the new ones coming every day? Well, I guess I'll just give it away. My very simple answer is no, that's not really the answer here. Now that's not to say they don't have any merit at all. Most of these fad diets have taken a scientific fact in the literature and they just ran crazy with it. And they blew it out of proportion, they went to an extreme, and then they marketed it like crazy. And then there's the whole oh, did you hear Sally? She lost 30 pounds on the keto diet, then you want to try it too. I do have patients that are doing quite well on some of these diets. Most of them don't sustain it past a couple years. After a few years, something lapses, important food groups are being missed out, health can lapse. So if you do choose to do a fad diet like this, please do it in moderation. I am in more support of the modified diets, modified keto or modified whatever. But again, and I'll get to this in a bit, healthy eating patterns are more important than following one specific dietary fad. Yeah?
Would you consider intermittent fasting to be a healthy eating pattern, or?
I will answer that question in a later slide. I have a whole trial about that. Okay. Yep. All right. So fad diets are appealing, but humans are social animals, and we want to do that pack mentality, and we want to join the group, and we want to prove that we're better at things, and so don't fall for it. Most of these are truly sort of commercialized. And if you see it on social media, it's probably a fad diet. Don't believe it. All right, so we're about to dive into the evidence. I'm going to do a quick review of how do you review evidence, then we're going to do a potty break, and then we'll actually get into the literature a little bit, which I keep on promising to do. So how to interpret the evidence. So this is actually what got me into this talk, because throughout my entire medical training, I see in one newsletter, I'm like, oh, look at that, eating more of this causes this disease. And then literally the next day or the next week, I get another feed that says, oh, not eating that will cause that other disease. And they literally contradicted each other. So which is it? Does it cause a heart attack or not cause a heart attack? What's going on here? I don't have a percentage, but I would say just going across my newsfeed, 90% of what I see in my medical news feeds are correlational data. And I'll get into that. Basically, they took a wide population, they just saw what happened, and they say, oh, in this group, it tends to happen. That's, maybe that's what's going on. That is not the kind of data you want to be following. Not to say that never has merit, but if you see a case control, a cohort study, something that just follows a group of population and just watches them, I want you to be really careful with what you try to interpret from that data, because that has been proven wrong many, many, many times with the test of time. So most of the studies that I am handed by patients, I'm like, oh, sorry, that's cohort data. It might be real, but it might not be. We'll see when they do a randomized controlled trial. So that's really what I'm getting at. I really tried to pick only randomized controlled trials for my literature review here, because the cohort data and the observational data is massive. Millions of studies that have been done, all of what I would call poor quality literature. You can really only infer causation, like this is a verifiable fact, from a randomized controlled trial. And that's when they take a group of people and they literally do a lottery, and one group gets randomly assigned to one half, one group gets randomly assigned to the other, and then they double check to make sure there's an equal number of females, males, rich, poor, et cetera. And then they do one thing to the other group, and they do nothing to the other group. That's called the control group, and they see what happens. So they have truly randomized and controlled and then watched. And those are much higher quality studies. And then you get into some nuances of how many people were in the randomized controlled study, how long did they study it for. There's a lot of details there. But really, you're going to want to, if you're hopping on PubMed to do a search, if you haven't discovered PubMed, that's better than a Google search. Go to PubMed and then type in your question, medical question there. But you can actually filter for randomized controlled trials and look just at those there. And if you see the word systematic review and network meta-analysis, that's when they, researcher that goes out and finds 200 studies and summarizes them for you. So those are even better because somebody else did all the work of reading 200 studies. But make sure if you do a meta-analysis of 40 cohort studies, that data is still not very strong. But if you do a randomized meta-analysis of 100 randomized controlled trials, that's really good data. Like I would make a bet on that. So again, I kind of made it this point already. Observational cohort data is something you want to really try to avoid. I wouldn't make any changes based on that. And this is the sentence I want you to memorize. Correlation is not causation. I'm going to give you a little example of that. So, who likes ice cream in the audience? Yeah, right? I know I'm giving a lecture on nutrition and food as medicine, but I still like ice cream and I'll still eat it. Who likes sunshine? Right? I was ready for spring, and this snowstorm really bummed me out this last couple days here. So ice cream and sunshine. Well, let's say I did a little study and I said, like I really want to get some more sunshine here, and I decided to map it out, and I looked at all the ice cream consumption, all the sunny days, and wait a second, every time, like sunny days and ice cream, they correlate. There's a lot of sunny ice cream and a lot of ice cream days and sunny days together. So maybe that means if I eat more ice cream, we'll have more sunny days. How cool would that be, right? If only correlational data worked that way. I picked this example because obviously we all know that eating more ice cream does not bring more sunny days. But according to an observational study, a lot of these things that come up in the media that you read on your newsfeed, that's what they're saying. They're saying the medical equivalent of eating more ice cream causes a sunny day. And so if you kind of really remember, correlation is not causation. These correlate real well, but they are not causation. You will do yourself a benefit when reading these studies and deciding what to believe and what not to believe.
Well, what happens if you turn that around?
Yeah, and then again, so you turn that around, right? More sunny days. That does actually cause ice cream, right? Well, indirectly though, right? So was it the sunny day actually causing more production of ice cream? Or was it that people then got hot and then people then, right? So there's different steps in between. So the real world is always messier than it actually looks in a study. But yeah, correlation is not causation, right? Maybe it's an indirect causation, maybe it's actually flipped the other way around. Now, let's say we decided to do your study that was like, okay, I want to study this. Does more ice cream actually cause more sunny days? Let's get half of this group, and you guys all eat all the ice cream you want. We're going to eat it every day, 3 times a week. Like, here we go. And this group, no ice cream. Sorry, you're not allowed to have any. Or just eat whatever you want. That's technically a better control. Just don't eat extra ice cream. And then we watch the 2 groups for the entire year, and lo and behold, sadly, the sun's still only shone on certain days, regardless of which group was eating their ice cream. There, in fact, was no correlation. Was no causation. It was just correlation. But if you follow this this cohort data and you try to believe it, we did notice that one group got more cavities. Whoopsies. So this is something you really have to look out for, because if you take cohort data and you really try to run with it and say, that's correlation, and you try to make changes, we have done real harm in medicine when we tried to make changes or recommendations based off of correlational data. We really need to be looking at these randomized controlled trials. Now, again,
ice cream just makes you feel sunny.
feel sunny, I love that, right? There's inner sunniness. So this is obviously, again, a mock example, but a very real life example is the study of allergies, specifically peanut butter in early life. So back more than 20 years ago, even when I was a kid, and certainly when you guys were kids, the recommendation for all kids was be careful of peanut butter, be careful of allergens. Like when your baby started eating food, you did not introduce peanut butter. And they often said, wait till they're 1, maybe even 2 or 3. That's a high allergen food. We have correlative data that shows that when you give kids peanut butter, they start getting allergies, and we're real scared of that, so be careful, wait a while. And that went on for decades following that correlational data, until finally, about 10 years ago, a group of researchers out of Israel started to notice a little bit of that's a different correlation here in Israel, where they were actually giving this something called Bomba. It's this peanut puff, and they were giving it to babies young, way younger than a year like the recommendation, and some of those, wait a second, they're not getting out? So they finally did a randomized controlled clinical trial. And they did it, and this is really, we've got dozens of meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials at this point, so we've got really good data that shows actually the earlier you give peanut butter, the less allergic you are. So as you probably know, I'm a family medicine doctor, so I do adults as well as pediatrics, and every baby I see at 4 months of age, I say, so, foods. 6 months is when you're allowed to give foods, but wait, I want peanut butter and eggs is the other one. Peanut butter and eggs. I want you to start giving them a little smear of peanut butter, not enough to choke on. Just have them lick that, once a day, starting at 4 months of age. The exact opposite of what we did 20 or 30 years ago. We have such good randomized controlled data now that we know that early allergen exposure reduces allergies, and significantly reduces allergies. Even in somebody who has a parent with anaphylaxis to peanut butter, we still do that because we know it'll decrease the chance that that kid will get their parents' allergies. So again, we did it wrong for decades off of correlational data until finally they did a randomized controlled trial and proved the exact opposite to what we believed is true. So randomized controlled trials, that's the point of that slide. But despite all of my spiels about randomized controlled trials and allergens and stuff, even when the studies make it look really clear, like this is the fact, you have to do this, everybody is different, right? So I might say, milk is fantastic, vitamin D, we all need to drink more. I'd be like, but I'm lactose intolerant. That ain't gonna work for me, right? So you have to interpret it for your body. Or maybe it's just I don't like fish. I'm sorry, I'm just not gonna eat fish. That's okay, right? Everybody is different. You gotta do what you can do for your body. So please don't feel like there's any judgment in this room. This is I want very much food is for pleasure as well, and everybody is different. So every study that I'm gonna review right after this break, I want you to just think about how it fits your body, how it fits your needs, and whether that's something that you want to try to incorporate. Other pearls of wisdom, if a diet sounds too good to be true, it usually is. It's most fad diets. And if an eating plan eliminates a whole food group, it's probably a fad diet, not generally a good idea. And again, if you heard about it from social media, please be skeptical. Go check it on PubMed and use that RCT filter for randomized controlled trial. All right, we're gonna do a movement and potty break now. So this is just an activity recommendation saying muscle strengthening 2 days a week. It doesn't even have to be going out and free weighting, but just sitting in a wheelchair even, just 1, 2, 3, there we go, I did it. That is one of the USDA activity recommendations. We are going to move on to the last final bit of the lecture part before we go to our cooking demo. So this is kind of my rapid fire review of some of that evidence that I was advertising earlier. I'm mostly going through randomized controlled trials and often meta-analyses. Now, I am not going to belabor the point of how many randomized controlled trials we summarized and exactly the details. That if you do like those details, all of them are in your packets. I actually did a quick little review and I have the link, so if you'd like to read PubMed articles, you can hop on and read the whole study in its length. And again, I'm kind of doing the forest through the trees approach and making a very general statement that I think we can infer from these studies. But if you get into the weeds, there's a lot of nuance in there too. All right, so study number 1, the Mediterranean diet and cardiovascular risk. This is something that at some point in your life you've probably said, but then what diet should I follow? And some doctor or some nutritionist said the Mediterranean diet. That is because it is by far the most evidence-based diet. So I won't, again, belabor the point of how this is a systematic review of 30 randomized controlled trials and yada, yada, yada. So really good data is the point there. But yes, this is a very good diet to follow. Now, I wouldn't say that you have to follow the diet like the Atkins diet or the Mediterranean diet, but rather follow the dietary pattern. And what it is at its core is it's a lot of fruits and vegetables and fiber and add in some oils and fish. Hey, what do you know? That's exactly what we've been talking about all lecture. So follow these dietary patterns. Most evidence-based diet, and if you really do want to follow a diet, this is a good one you can kind of look up and use that as a dietary pattern to follow. And then if you're really interested in the details, these are the actual studies that show your blood pressure drops 3 points and your cholesterol, maybe a little bit. And then there is actually mortality improvement as well, but that also is good for a low-fat diet. It's not like the Mediterranean diet is some magical version of things. Healthy dietary patterns. Next one, fiber. I dedicated many slides to fiber earlier in this talk, and here is the studies. I should say studies. You see 1, 2, 3, 4. I couldn't choose between the 4, so I put all 4 on there. This again is systematic reviews of 58, 12, tons of randomized controlled trials, thousands of patients, and it is hard to randomize thousands of people. These are very expensive studies to run. But the take-home point I want you to know is that fiber is very, very healthy for you. I think you probably already got that from my previous slides, but the studies back it up here. Now, quantity, if you look at the guidelines, I think it's 25 grams for women, 30 for men. Oh boy, 12 grams per 1,000 calories. Okay, if you're like me and I don't feel like counting the calories and counting the fiber, I'm going to follow the evidence here. Yes, the guidelines are supposed to be based on evidence, but sometimes there's slight discrepancies like this. These studies showed that the risk reduction, the improvement that we see in LDL and cholesterol and body fat and glucose and weight, that happens the most when you're above 25 grams of fiber. but there is no reason to believe it stops there. It's probably better as you go up. I'll cover in a little bit how some people can eat massive amounts of fiber. It's not exponential after that. It's not like you get triply healthy, but more is not a bad thing here. Again, have your water with it though. But I just want to point out some of the facts here. In some of these studies, 5.5 pounds of weight loss, BMI dropping by almost a full point, your fasting glucose dropping by 3, cholesterol dropping by 6 points. Like, these are big things that I prescribe medicines to do, and just having more fiber will do it. So these are really cool outcomes. And then again, I put might here because I was trying to signal I did rely on one correlational study here, but I thought it really, if the correlational data meets with the other 50 randomized controlled trials, it's probably true. But it has been shown in these correlational data to decrease mortality, heart attack, stroke, diabetes, et cetera. There's a debate out there about colon cancer. The randomized controlled trials just haven't gone out that far yet. They've only been studied for a year or two, and it takes colon cancer more than a year or two to be studied. So might also help with colon cancer risk as well. But I can't say that with certainty yet to the studies. All right, next study, saturated fat. Most of us were in the era where saturated fat was the bad guy, right? You can't eat saturated fat. It's going to give you a heart attack or stroke. You can't do it. And while I'm certainly not here to espouse the health benefits of saturated fat. It is not that healthy a thing. You do not need more of it in your diet. I do agree it's not that great for you. These studies here, these are again systematic reviews of many randomized controlled trials, do show that there is a little bit of a link in stroke risk. But it is not the horrible thing that it was made out to be, where it's causing all the heart attacks or strokes. Actually, when you dive out into the study, there really wasn't any increase in heart attacks and only a very small increase in non-fatal strokes. So it's bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not like the devil. You shouldn't do everything you can to avoid all saturated fats. But please do avoid trans fats. Those are very bad. So take-home point, saturated fat is not great for you, but it's not like the worst in the whole world. Reducing it in your diet will help reduce risk of stroke. And more importantly, remember that healthy fat I gave, not the fat on your belly, but like the healthy fats? Replace some of those saturated fats, those big, thick butters and such, or animal fats. Try to replace those with some of those healthier fat options. Then you don't have to worry that much about fat. Indigenous cultures and diet. So I kind of broke my rule about randomized controlled trials here. This is a massive correlational cohort study. But I picked it still because I thought it gave a really cool historical and evolutionary perspective. And because it was random groups of sort of indigenous populations over the last few centuries, they were almost kind of randomly picked in some ways. So I thought it was sort of quasi-randomized through history. Either way, let me get down to the thing. So this actually looked at 4 ethnic populations: the Yemenite Jews, the Tokelauans, the Tanushimaru Japanese, and the Maasai tribe. Not sure if any of you are students of history. I am certainly not, but these are sort of ancient indigenous cultures. And in these groups, as we look back at the historical data, diseases like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer were relatively rare. We didn't see a lot of them. And diets were minimally processed. There was a lot of natural seeds and whole grains and fruits and vegetables, and there really wasn't refined sugar and refined carbs. They didn't have the industry capabilities of making those foods. And then through Westernization and stealing of land and resettling and the tragedies that happen through human history, they transitioned unintentionally to Western diets. And very dramatically, in every single one of these populations and more, chronic disease followed. We started seeing massive increases in diabetes. Sugar and refined carbohydrates were strongly associated with all of this stuff. But interestingly, when you actually looked at the data, calories themselves were not really the bad guy. It was really the sugar and the refined carbohydrates. And we all learned that refined carbohydrates are sugar. So sugar is really the enemy there. And then again, that saturated fat thing, this was really cool. The Inuit people, these are the Eskimos up, and they literally eat diets full of whale blubber. Like, could you design a diet with more saturated fat, please, right? Pure saturated fat. And yet they were not having massive heart attacks and strokes at the time. They were actually pretty healthy in a lot of ways. So again, saturated fat, not great for you, but not the end all be all. Really, sugar and those highly refined carbohydrates are more the thing you should be concerned about. So if you want to read this study, again, it's in your paperwork there, but the take-home point is that we evolved eating diets with massive amounts of fiber. The Maasai tribe, some of these tribes are still alive and have switched back to their traditional diets and reversed all of their health conditions and have almost no diabetes and such now. They're having more than 50 grams of fiber a day. Some of them is like 80 or 90 grams of fiber a day. Like I don't think I couldn't get that high. There's no way. So once you add sugars and refined carbohydrates, that will increase chronic diseases that plague Western societies. And if we decrease consumption of these processed foods, because some of these groups, again, kind of went back to the traditional diets, we can improve those diseases. So really cool sort of historical perspective on a lot of this stuff as well. Intermittent fasting. So there's some earlier questions about this, and here is the evidence-based answer. So I found 2 good studies that really was, again, meta-analyses of 43 randomized controlled trials over 2,400 patients. And I don't need to belabor the point, but basically, yes, it works, but no, you don't have to do it. The how it works is, and this is actually a fairly short study. This is looking at a matter of 8 weeks or 12 weeks. So this is not years of intermittent fasting. But we did see a little bit lower weight, but we're talking a pound or 2. Slightly lower BMI, slightly lower cholesterol, but we're talking only a couple points. And interestingly, if you made somebody follow a calorie restriction for that same interval, same benefits. Really not much of a difference. And then another question was, is breakfast actually the most important meal of the day? I get that question a lot. Well, I found a randomized controlled trial showing that no, it's not. Actually, skipping breakfast for some folks can cause a pound of weight loss, but maybe mess with your cholesterol a little bit too. Now, this is not me trying to tell you to skip breakfast. I'm saying you're allowed to skip breakfast if you don't like breakfast. I am not much of a breakfast person, but if you like breakfast, please keep on eating your breakfast. There are some health conditions where you do have to have more frequent small meals. Diabetes, you don't want to let that blood sugar swing too far one way or the other. But no, breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. No, you do not have to have 3 square meals a day. You can eat however your body is telling you to eat. And that's really the take-home point here. You do not have to skip meals, but you don't have to have 3 meals a day. If you do choose to intermittent fast, there is no magic. And yes, you can go into these mouse studies and stuff and say, wow, okay, but then you're getting into glycolysis, and then you're changing the way that you process energy. Most of that has kind of been debunked when we actually look at these randomized controlled trials. It's probably mostly through calorie restriction. For some people, intermittent fasting is absolutely your thing. I have had many patients that come and say, yeah, I really time restrict, and that's really helping, and it's absolutely, keep on doing it. If you're getting your nutrients that way, there is no problem doing intermittent fasting, but it is not for everybody. Go ahead.
There are no long-term studies yet to tell us about what happens over time with cholesterol and some of these levels. It's about more than weight loss.
Yeah. So in these shorter studies, less than a year, not much of an improvement. I mean, certainly decreased weight should lead to those other outcomes, but yeah, the cholesterol and stuff was not very impressive, and some of them maybe some slight increases. Well, actually, cholesterol will change within a couple weeks, 3, 4, 5 weeks. So and I'll get to this in another study, we can see pretty massive cholesterol differences even in some of the fiber studies. We're only over 12 weeks, and we saw big cholesterol differences. So I would actually say that I feel comfortable from even these short studies that the cholesterol difference is not that remarkable from intermittent fasting. Now, what does that do 10 years down the road? Nobody's done that study, so I certainly can't say that. But I know that the cholesterol effect, certainly within a 12-week effect, was not very impressive, and it should have been impressive if it really was the end-all be-all. Now, there was and this is, again, correlational data. I saw a question from our surveys from the first talk about, there's this big American Journal of Cardiology study that just said that intermittent fasting actually increased heart attacks. What's going on there? My answer to that one is, if you go look at it, it's not randomized. That is correlational data. So they were looking at massive quantities of people and just seeing that they trended more towards heart attacks. We can think of a million other reasons, and they haven't actually released the actual details of the study, so I could dive into the how and the why and who was being followed. Maybe it's the people in that study who were doing intermittent fasting were unhealthy enough that they couldn't go out and buy an extra meal. Maybe they had food insecurity and so couldn't get 3 square meals a day, and so just intermittent fasted because that was easier for them. And then that therefore caused more heart attacks from the stress. And you can think of a million different reasons why skipping a meal may not work for everybody. But in terms of randomized controlled trials, I would say do it if you want, but don't feel compelled to do it. It's an easy way of calorie restriction for some people. And I get a lot of questions on that, but that really is the answer. You can do it if you want, but you don't have to. Mouse studies make it look far more impressive than it is. Actually, final point before I go into that one. There are some really cool mouse studies where they starve these poor little mice, and these mice literally live 30% longer, and wouldn't we all like that, right? I'd like to live an extra 30 years. That'd be so cool. But then we get back to that very first slide I had, eating is pleasure. I would not have a very enjoyable 70 years in this life or 100 years in this life if I was starving for all 100 years of those lives. So maybe I'll take an extra 5 years off the end, which were maybe not going to be my most golden years ever, so I can enjoy the rest of my life a lot more right? Mice didn't have that option, but we do. All right, I'm not going to take a very long break here, but feel free to stand and stretch as I talk you through Walk with a Doc before we go through the last final studies here. The USDA does recommend 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity. Although it says moderate intensity, I settle for a walk. It doesn't even have to be that brisk of a walk. It could be a slow walk if you want. Technically, I see 150 minutes and I get paralyzed. Like, I don't have 150 minutes in my day. I've got patients to see. I got 4 kids at home I got to take care of. There's no way. But we divide that up. Okay, wait, 30 minutes, 5 days a week. That equals 150. Okay, that feels a little more doable. I could do 30 minutes a day. I can squeeze that in somewhere. I can go for a walk with the kids, or just walking up the stairs doing their laundry. That'll get it as well. Walk with the Doc is a program that I joined last year, and I'm doing it again this year. I don't have all the time and dates, but they will be announced soon and in the radio and the media, and I'm sure Gail and others will have all that data. But I'm doing the walks on Monday here at Parkview. I'll be leaving from the front entrance probably around 1 o'clock on Mondays, and I go for a 30-minute walk of the Parkview campus. And if you want to walk with me, you can come. Gets me out of my seat and moving as well. And if Monday doesn't work for you, all of our other primary care offices have a primary care doctor who has said that they will do a 30-minute walk. And we are trying to, this is a national program, and we've joined on here as a walk with a doc. And you get our ear for 30 minutes while we're walking with you. So that is the Walk with the Doc program. Our kickoff, there's actually going to be like a kickoff party and like a DJ and stuff, I'm told, in May. And then we walk May through the fall. And then I was a wuss, and I stopped in the winter. I don't want to walk, slip and fall on the ice. All right. Last few studies here because I got to get to this cooking demo. So salt. I'm going to go right to the take home. There's lots of studies that show that eating less salt does help your blood pressure. It is more important, though, if you have hypertension. So if you are young and healthy and have no blood pressure problems, I mean, a little extra salt is probably not going to hurt you right now. Slight increase, but really not impressive. But if you have hypertension, you really do need to watch that salt intake. It will actually has been shown to reduce heart attacks, strokes, and deaths. And even more interestingly, if you add a salt substitute, and I believe it was potassium chloride is what they added in this study, tastes just as good as what people tell me, and it negated all of the, so you can add it and you won't get all the bad effects from that. So salt substitutes is a very helpful strategy if you really want that taste of salt still. Saw some hands.
If your blood pressure is managed by a blood pressure medication?
Yeah. So if your blood pressure is managed by a medication, then what can you do? So I get this a lot when I say, oh, so nice to meet you, new patient. What's going on? Tell me what, oh, I'm healthy. I got no problems. I go, oh, great. And then I look at their med list, and there's like 15 things there. I'm like, no problems? Why are you on all these meds? So you still have hypertension, even if it is well controlled. And I would say you still need to decrease your salt, because that means we're driving up your blood pressure, and that medication is artificially bringing it down, not naturally doing so, right? And that blood pressure medication is not a perfect 24-hour acting drug. There is still stress in that body. So I would say please still follow a low-salt diet. Furthermore, you can probably stop one of those medications if you start following a low-salt diet, or reduce one of them. I don't know what med you're on. All right, I'm gonna, oh yeah, one more question?
Define low salt.
Low salt, so 2,300 milligrams. I was going to say, in the hospital, we had a long debate about, is 2,000, is it 2,500? And certainly, definitely get less than 3,000. A lot of Americans eat more than that. I'd get closer to 2,500, ideally even lower, closer to 2,000. But please don't measure it out to the exact milligram. And like, oh no, I got 2,200 instead of 2,400. Like, if you're getting less than 2,500, you're doing way better than most Americans.
Which is equivalent to 1 teaspoon.
1 teaspoon, okay. And we'll get to this in the third lecture. Most of the salt you are eating is not the salt that you're shaking on. A lot of people say, I don't have any extra salt. I don't shake anything on. It's already in the food you bought, right? You get that can of beans that you're putting into your homemade soup. There's half of your sodium for the day right there. So you got to read your ingredients. That'll be the third lecture. I'm going to keep on going. Tracking and weight loss. So again, skipping through the studies here, just going to the end here. This is actually mostly cohort studies, but one systematic review. Being mindful of your food and tracking your food will actually help you lose weight, help you be healthier. But more importantly, if you get dietary advice from anybody, nutritionist, MD, whatever, you will have a cholesterol drop from that alone and a blood pressure drop of that alone. So guess what? By attending this lecture, you will be healthier. Lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, you did it. Well done, you came here today. Omnivorous versus vegan diet. This one, I put it at the last second because this just came out recently and it was so cool. 22 pairs of identical twins. They made half of them eat a vegan diet, and the other half eat omnivorous. And I want to say healthy vegan and healthy omnivorous, because just because you're vegan doesn't mean it's healthy. You can eat really unhealthy vegan food. Oreos are vegan. That does not make them healthy. But you can actually go through the study, healthy omnivorous, healthy vegan, and this is within 8 weeks. Look at this cholesterol drop here. LDL dropped by 14 points in 8 weeks, simply by switching from animal-based protein to plant-based protein. That is a massive drop, and other impressive things here. And I was really bummed to read this. I mean, I am not a big meat eater, but I am not a vegetarian. And I still don't want to become a vegetarian, but I am eating more plant-based protein after reading this study, because this is a very compelling study that we need to be eating more plant-based foods. But again, food is medicine. Enjoy your food too. If you love that steak, you can still eat it, but just don't make it an everyday thing. Try to reduce that animal-based protein. It is clogging up your arteries a little bit here. So plant-based diets are very good for us. Trying to increase your plant-based protein, plant-based diets will be healthy for you. And meat is mostly, but even dairy. I mean, we still need dairy for calcium. That's a longer conversation, but plant-based protein. This one is kind of, this is basically just proving the point that the Mediterranean diet is not the only healthy diet pattern to follow. The DASH diet is another one. Something called the Pure diet. I don't like that name, but it is. This is mostly cohort studies, but again, just increase your fruits, veggies, legumes, nuts, plant-based protein with fiber is always a good idea. You can't go wrong there. And then this is, I got this from the study, and then I kind of put the pictures up. I put this up for my kids so they could really understand, oh, you need to eat more fruits and more vegetables, and here's your legumes and your nuts and your fish and your dairy. And you'll note that we do not have to eat steak. Steak and chicken are not on this. Now, you can eat them. And actually, some of the people who did the healthiest in the study and had 20 to 30% lower risk of death did actually eat red meat, but it wasn't one of their foundational foods. It was like a once in a while thing. And if you eat 5 out of these 6 food groups on a regular basis, you're golden. Like, you will die less, is basically what this study showed. So, in summary, what should I eat and why? Fad diets are out. Mediterranean diet is a great guide for healthful eating. Plant-based foods are very healthy. Go for those kind of patterns right there. Plant-based foods. Maybe even vegan if you can stomach it, but that's hard for me. Exclusion of food groups is not the key. Don't go too crazy on saturated fat. Fiber is very, very good for many, many reasons, at least 25 grams. I skimmed over it, but there was a sub-study in there that says that if you're at maybe 20 grams and you just can't get any more fiber in your diet, I don't want to make you all go buy fiber supplements, but you can supplement to get that last little bit, and that's when you want to buy a soluble fiber supplement. Up to 10 grams. I have some fiber gummies at home. It's 5 grams and 3 gummies. 10 grams was done in that study. So I'm taking my 10 grams of soluble fiber to help boost my fiber a little bit. That's not an endorsement, though. That's just from the study. Reducing sugars and refined carbs is a good idea, especially from that indigenous natural diet. That really, I thought, was an extra support there. If you want to skip a meal, that's okay. And tracking food intake may help, but again, nutritional advice helps. So coming here will help you be a little bit more healthful. So if you have to remember 6 words from this lecture, these are the 6 words I want you to remember. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. This is a quote from Michael Pollan, and this is actually the title of his book, I'm pretty sure. I have not yet read it, but I really need to. Great, I've heard, great book. And I read this, I said, oh my God, I just did literally 3 weeks of like nonstop research, and he summed it up in 6 words. Like, holy hell, I should have listened to my parents, just eat more fruits and veggies. I would have saved myself all this time. Eat food, not too much. Now, what does that mean? Eat food, actual whole food, not processed, not packaged, not stripped and refined, none of those sugars and refined carbs, like eat actual real whole foods. Not too much is, watching your quantity, but if you want to skip a meal, that's okay, whatever pattern works for you. And then that mostly plants is huge. And that's, again, that omnivorous versus vegan randomized controlled trial, but also the fiber. Think back to all those fiber diets, the feeding the buddies in your belly. You want to get more plants. And that is time for the food demo. I'm sorry I went a little over.
So we're going to do, start with the sauerkraut, because we talked about probiotics. There's so many different recipes. When we started this project, we were thinking, oh, it has to be boiled and cooked. But as I looked through more recipes, we realized it's actually, there's several approaches. So the approach that I used was a lot quicker, and it didn't require vinegar, but I did put a little bit of apple cider vinegar into the recipe, into what you tasted, because there was no flavor to it, even after it had aged for 24 hours. So
Don't put vinegar, you're going to kill the bacteria.
Does it kill it? Does it remove it 100%?
It's too acidic for the bacteria.
Oh, did not know that.
I'm going to have to do some homework on that.
Go ahead.
He's a brewer.
You're a brewer of, beer?
I spent 30 years in the craft brewing industry.
Okay, so, but I wanted people to get a sense of
Sauerkraut all the time.
what it would have wound up tasting like in case people dipped into it early. So, do not add vinegar. And if you look at a can of sauerkraut in the grocery store, it's just cabbage, water, salt. That's it. There is no vinegar in traditional sauerkraut.
The longer you ferment it, the more sour it will get and give you a lot of that flavor.
It'll be there naturally, exactly.
You want to ferment it for quite a while. In weeks, several weeks, or even several months.
Yeah, the recipes would say 3 to 10 days. So the little container that you're going to take home with you, just know that you're going to want to mash it down and stir it for at least 10 more days. And then you could take a little piece out and taste it and see what you think until it gets to the sourness that you like it. But yeah, they said you can hold it up to 10 months. So yeah, unrefrigerated. So all right. This is a tool that my mom taught me or showed me how to use instead of food processors. It's just, have people seen this guy? It's pretty handy and quick and easy. Easier cleanup than the food processors. So what you'll do is you'll make a whole cup's worth of that and then fill your ball jar. So imagine a whole cup has just been shredded because I need to leave a little time to show all the demos. And then you'll use a little bit of caraway seed. And then you'll use a little bit of salt. And I brought both because there was big questions about salt and what kind of salt to use at the last lecture.
You don't want to use iodized salt.
This one's
What happens if you used iodized salt?
The iodine interacts with it in the wrong way. You want to use the Himalayan.
the pink Himalayan.
That's the same with bread, right? Sourdough.
Sourdough won't rise if you use iodized salt.
Same here.
Good to know. Thank you for being here. All right. So then what you do is you just keep stirring it. That's it. That's how you make it. You have to press it. And I wound up using like a meat tenderizer to press it because I didn't have the presses and things that they showed in the videos. But yeah.
Do you keep it in the refrigerator?
No. No. They said the best temperature is 65 to 75 and just let it sit out. Yeah.
So you didn't use salt?
We recommended that it be Himalayan pink salt, not iodized salt when it comes to making fermentable products.
Is the pink better than that?
It could be kosher salt, it could be, as long as it's not iodized. All right. Okay. And as we learned, but apple cider vinegar, there's all kinds of stuff about, oh, should we be using this to lose weight? It doesn't, there's double-blind placebo-controlled studies suggest that it doesn't cause weight loss. There's been a few small but not randomized control studies suggesting that a small amount of it could be helpful in controlling glucoses a little bit, but it's not going to be to replace medications if somebody has diabetes. All right, so any questions around probiotics or around the sauerkraut? The sauerkraut's out in the hallway, so you can, before you leave, feel free to take one.
You said 10 days on that?
Yep, just 10 days before you dip into it.
Yes?
So
The question is, she doesn't like fermented foods, wondering what else she can have.
I think, pro and prebiotics are in lots of fruits and vegetables, so if it's not fermented, you're still going to get some of them. Yogurt has it, but that's it's not really fermented, but it's sour and tart. I don't know if you care for that. Kefir. And then, what was the other one we mentioned, but kombucha is also fermented, so, yeah. Okay.
It's not really a requirement. Yes.
I always thought that Clausen pickles were fermented, but it turns out that they're not. They've just got vinegar and they're not fermented with salt. And a lot of pickles and olives are like that. Most of them are not.
Pickles and fermented. I think that really what Dr. Faraci was saying and what the general guidelines are is if you are eating a wide range of fruits and vegetables and you are eating like a plant-forward diet, you are feeding all of the bacteria and you are creating that microbiome and getting all those probiotics. So you're getting the bacterias in. So if you, like pickles and olives and things like that, if you like them, then eat them. They're not actually considered even vegetables in the school lunch program, for example. So if you like them, eat them. And whether or not it's going to change your microbiome is questionable, but
Yeah.
that's the
They'd
same.
be
It's
getting
kind
a lot
of
of
a
salt.
fad thing about. The question is about drinking pickle juice and if that's going to add and give you some sort of health benefits. I would say look at the sodium content on your pickles when you're picking those jars and if you're drinking the juice in them. But definitely would fall into like that fad category.
One of the other things, I'm going to move on to the crackers demo, but I brought a modern pestle. Oh, okay. We might do the minestrone soup demo at the follow-up. Anyway, crushing seeds will help you get access to the nutrients, such as flax, so buy it crushed. I'll just show people, when I did the crackers, I have all the ingredients here and I was going to demo it, but I think I'll do the minestrone soup with all the pictures. But roll them out flatter. I used a roller to make it. And then the recipe that we put in the book doesn't have the bake time. And someone mentioned that it was probably dehydrated. I don't have a dehydrator, so I baked these. And I can pass this around so people can see how it came out. It's much different thickness, but it's basically the same thing. And these I didn't have currants, so I used chopped raisins. So I don't know if that.
How long do you bake them?
I did it for 12 minutes at 350, and they came out pretty crisp. I originally put it for 20, and then I took them out because I kept keeping an eye on them just to make sure that they wouldn't burn. So yeah, and I had to mill the walnuts just so that when you're, you do have to have a food processor if you want to make these because you have to be able to turn walnuts into powder. It said until smooth, but I didn't get them smooth like peanut butter. They were more like the flax.
About flaxseed, I'd always heard that if we get them crushed, they degrade really quickly.
Yeah.
You should get them whole and crush them right
Crush them right away because they will. I've read that too. Is that if you have flax, if you don't crush it, you should keep it refrigerated, and then right before you're going to prepare it, crush it. There was a woman who wrote a book just about flax seeds and all the benefits. It also has omega-3 for the question earlier. So technically, there are more vitamins and minerals in something that's whole before. If it sits on your counter for a while, it's going to lose a little bit of that. It'll still have some benefit, though. It's not like it's...
Then you're getting into the weeds.
Yeah, exactly. The weeds are good to explain.
all about weeds.
Yeah.
We were hoping we were kind of clearing the weeds a little for you and kind of focusing on the, big picture stuff. Yes?
Should you keep walnuts refrigerated or just walnuts?
The question is, should you keep all nuts refrigerated or just walnuts? I personally keep all my nuts in the freezer. I feel like they stay fresher, but.
I do the same thing that Lexi does, or at least in a cool place. If I know I'm going to be using them like during the holidays, I'll just keep them in a cool place.
Snacking nuts don't last that long, so they stay in the cupboard. But.
And then I did want to show people this. This is hemp heart. I couldn't find hemp seed, and so I think that this has been pulverized already. Back to your point about should it be pulverized. I imagine if you buy hemp heart, which is what this looks like, it's going to be the same thing, but it's been crushed, pre-crushed already. So Dr. Howe would buy a lot of stuff in bulk, and I don't buy everything in bulk because I'm still getting some nutrients, again, the weeds, so yeah.
Any other questions? We had some other demos, but it is 6:30, so we do have more soup and crackers if anybody would like some more, and thank you all for coming.